Hi, Floppycatters. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Jean Hofve, who is a longtime holistic cat veterinarian who lives in Colorado. She has a couple of books on Amazon, The Complete Guide to Holistic Cat Care, as well as What Cats Should Eat. Dr. Jean is currently revising her What Cats Should Eat, and I'm going to let her talk about that a little bit more. Dr. Jean, thank you for doing another interview with us.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you.
So before we started recording, you had mentioned to me that you are revising your What Cats Should Eat, and I will include a link to your Little Big Cat website as well as your Little Big Cat Facebook group so that people can get notified of when that revision is up. But can you talk a little bit about what you're revising it for?
Well, the big thing is the research that's come out in the last little while about phosphorus levels in cat food. And it turns out that even healthy cats will show kidney damage eating a high phosphorus food. Now, meat is the primary source of phosphorus, but what they do is they add extra phosphorus because cats like the taste of phosphate, and it turns out that some of the phosphorus levels in cat foods are incredibly high. So in my book, What Cats Should Eat, I always put in an updated list of the brands and flavors that I recommend or that I think are okay. Maybe not, I might not recommend them, but for the sake of people having a variety of foods to choose from, I have a list of things that are acceptable. And it turns out that a lot of the ones that I thought were pretty good, actually, when you look at the phosphorus content, they're not so good. So I've revamped the whole thing, that whole list, and added a whole bunch of new stuff. I've added information for people in Europe and Australia and Asia, and because, you know, I realize that people around the world want to know what to feed their cat, and it's not just us here in the U.S. So, you know, it's expanded its little self from, it started out as 14 pages, and now it's 166 pages. So, but it's out for formatting right now, so I expect to have it published in the next couple of weeks. But you can look at my website, littlebigcat.com, or especially on the Facebook, Little Big Cat's Facebook page, and I'll have that updated as soon as it's ready to go. I wouldn't suggest buying the current version because we're probably going to have to take that down and republish it, and that so you wouldn't automatically get an update like if I just updated it. But it's so new and different that I'm going to have to start from scratch. So that's where we're at on that.
Okay. And that is only going to be available in a digital format, correct?
For now, but I am going to have it formatted for paperback. So it'll be a print on demand, and it'll be available from Amazon and who knows else when the time comes. So a lot of people want a hard copy.
Yes, I have experienced that, so that's why I asked. All right. Well, so when I originally emailed you asking if you were game for another interview, one of the topics that you came back to me with was that you wanted to talk about grain-free cat food and taurine. And I would like to know why, but I think it already has to do with what you just mentioned about your book.
Well, yes, and it's not specific to that, but you know, a couple of years ago, in around July 2018, the FDA published a alarm about grain-free dog foods causing heart disease in dogs, and they talked about, what's these boutique and legumes and potatoes, and it turns out none of that is correct, but it became a big thing, and people are still very concerned about it, and there's so much misinformation about it. I thought, well, this would be a good opportunity to set the record straight. And Perry says he would like me to straighten out the record too.
Well, good. I've been wondering about this myself, only because I know from reading Dr. Lisa Pearson's website that what a dog needs is different than what a cat needs. So, but I think maybe in the pet food industry, especially for consumers who aren't highly educated on that, it seems right when you hear something about dogs, then you assume the same about cats. So
yeah, and cats are a little different, but the principles are the same.
Okay. Did you want to talk in general about if grain-free is good or bad, or did you want me to start asking some of the questions that Floppycats readers had about grain-free food?
Well, let me just riff for a few minutes about the whole taurine thing.
Sure.
Taurine is an amino acid, and amino acids in the body are generally used to build proteins and enzymes and things like that. Taurine is really different. It's not used as a structural protein at all. It's almost a hormone. It has a lot of special functions. It's found primarily in bile, which helps break down dietary fat. It's really important in the muscles, eyes, brain, and immune system. It's an antioxidant. It's anti-inflammatory. It's a really interesting little molecule. Dogs can make their own taurine for the most part, and the precursors are other amino acids, sulfur-containing amino acids, methionine and cysteine. And, you know, the way it works is it was thought that originally that if you had those precursors that dogs and cats could make their own taurine. Well, that turned out to be not quite true. And in the 80s, some guys at University of California at Davis figured out that a whole tens of thousands of cats were going blind or dying of heart failure, and they figured out that it was due to taurine deficiency. Now, why was the taurine deficient? Well, at that point in the 80s, pet food manufacturers were dialing in how to make more money. And the way they thought about making more money is that they would reduce the amount of the most expensive ingredient, which was meat. Yeah, the most expensive ingredient is protein, meat protein. And so they said, well, you know, we can make protein out of corn gluten meal and some other stuff. And they started substituting more and more grain proteins for meat. And turns out cats died when you do that. So eventually cat foods were supplemented with taurine, and the epidemic of thousands of cats dying of heart disease went away. And the particular heart disease is called dilated cardiomyopathy. And what it is, I have dilated cardiomyopathy myself, so I can tell you exactly what it is. The heart loses strength, and because of the blood pressure in the heart, the walls stretch. And when they stretch, the muscle fibers can't contract properly anymore. So the heart just lays there and goes flippity-flop, and it's not really accomplishing much in the way of pumping blood in and out. So it's a pretty unpleasant disease. And, of course, with cats, they hide signs of disease until the last possible second. So typically, even now, if a cat is diagnosed with heart disease, it really is probably within a few weeks of death. And they can be treated, but it's unusual to be able to get them back at that point, because the disease is usually very advanced by the time they show symptoms. So taurine is supplemented in all cat foods, and a fair bit of it. You know, they figured it out. They figured how much they needed, and they AFCO set new minimums, and things have been just hunky-dory ever since, right? In dogs, it's a little different because dogs are supposed to be able to make their own taurine. Turns out certain breeds and certain lines of breeds can't. And it turns out the biggest dogs have such a slow rate of taurine synthesis that they often can't keep up. So Newfoundlands and Golden Retrievers, they still get taurine deficiency cardiomyopathy. Then the FDA apparently noticed that a whole bunch of dogs were getting dilated cardiomyopathy, not of the susceptible breeds, and they started looking at it, and they immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was taurine, and it's these grain-free foods, and because a certain larger than expected percentage of dogs were eating grain-free foods. Well, the problem is that dogs can get dilated cardiomyopathy for no particular reason. And it turns out that diet is a factor in less than 30% of dogs with dilated cardiomyopathy or DCM. So taurine may not even be the culprit. Some of the newer research says, well, it may be the microbiome. And it turns out when in the 80s with the cats, it was entirely due to the microbiome. The food may have had enough taurine in it, but the bacteria in the gut were stealing it. Turns out they really liked taurine, and they were scooping it up, and the cats were becoming deficient. So processing and the microbiome and that all that is probably the bigger factor. However, taurine is a variable kind of guy, and different meats have different amounts of it. And as long as you're feeding a good quantity and quality of meat, you're probably fine. But, when you're talking about commercial pet food, quality and quantity, kind of not a sure thing. So for some reason, the FDA focused on these boutique foods. Well, one of the questions that we'll get to was that it's these grain-free boutique foods that are problems. That how should I say this? Well, there's a Facebook group, DCM cardiomyopathy or something like that, and I can give you that
somebody mentioned
when
that.
we get to it.
Yeah.
Great page if you only look at the charts. I looked at the charts. The advice that people are giving each other on that page, terrible advice, terrible conclusions, not good. But the charts are extremely interesting. And I went through early on and analyzed the first 19 cases I found. In 15 of the cases of these supposedly boutique pet foods, out of 19, 15 of them were made by like Purina, Mars, Hills, and Champion. So the last time I checked, Purina was not a boutique brand. They own almost all of these boutique brands. Almost all of them are owned by the big dogs. And somebody asked about Blue Buffalo. Yeah, sorry, bought out by General Mills, and quality took a nosedive. Nutro, owned by Mars. So you know that the quality is already questionable when you're talking about these big guys. So, and then FDA was all, potatoes and legumes and all these peas and lentils and blah, 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 blah. Well, that turns out to be not entirely accurate either. And what I have found looking at the actual ingredients of the actual brands that were problems, one of them was a kangaroo-based food. And the ingredients were kangaroo meat, and then 7 kinds of legumes. So peas, pea starch, lentils, yellow lentils, green lentils, red lentils. The problem is, just like it was in the 80s, manufacturers substituting incomplete proteins for meat. Now, the problem with kangaroo in particular, all meats are complete proteins. They contain all the amino acids, all the essential amino acids, including taurine. But some of them have more or less taurine. Poultry and fish, high in taurine. Red meat, beef, venison, lamb, and kangaroo, low in taurine. So you take a low taurine meat and you cook it up with 5 or 7 kinds of legumes, now you have a problem. Okay, especially when you're talking about, I got 7 legumes in the food, and some of them are like pea starch and pea, fiber. Well, there's no taurine in plants. So now you have a situation where you have a named meat at the top, which, theoretically a good thing, although if you read my book, you'll find out why that's a bunch of boo. And I'm trying to be polite here.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but if you look at it logically, you've got a meat, and it's borderline in taurine, and then you got 7 kinds of plant materials. When you look at by weight, the plant materials outweigh the meat by a lot. So the problem is the amount of plant proteins and plant fractions, not per se that they're peas and starch, because I think 20% of the originally quote, bad foods that were implicated, they had grains in them. It was not all pulse-based foods. It was not, basically there's not a lot of commonality with all those foods, except they've got poor quality meat and a ton of plants. Same problem as before, same problem again. Now, in this whole thing, cats have been affected by this taurine thing, and cats have developed DCM on modern diets. About it, I think 8 or 9 cats documented. The other thing with the FDA is that when you look at the list of foods implicated, the list goes back 15 years. So this is not a modern problem. It's just more obvious now because we have social media and people are more apt to report things and say things and tell other people about it, and the vets are getting together and saying, hey, wait a minute. But it's not grain-free that's doing it. It probably has to do with the microbiome differentially stealing the taurine, but it's really how they're manufactured and what sort of products are in them. So if you have a meat, but the meat is overwhelmed by the amount of plant materials in the food, you're going to have a problem. Whether the carbohydrate is corn or peas or potatoes, it's all the same kind of thing. So if you look at your label and you have 3 or 4 plant proteins, you got whole lentils and you got pea fiber, 2 or 3 or 4, you're probably fine, especially if it's a meat that has a fair amount of taurine, which is, poultry primarily is the best source. Fish is a good source too. But, there's a lot of problems with fish in cat food too. And yes, we can talk about that another day. But I don't want people to freak out because it isn't really about the grain-free foods. It isn't really about which carbohydrates are in the food. The fact is that all dry foods have a lot of carbohydrate in them. And they're not ideal for cats because cats don't use carbohydrates. They digest them fine, they absorb them fine, and they immediately turn them into fat. So dry foods with lots of carbs are already a bad idea for cats. So, we got to use more common sense and look at what cats are designed to eat and feed them an appropriate diet, which is like not a lot of these things.
Right. And I often find these conversations a little on the depressing side, only because it seems like consumers are set up for failure when it comes to wanting to give their cat the best diet, and thinking that, you want to trust a commercial about Blue Buffalo and not have to figure out whether or not they're owned by Mars or Purina or what. I mean, it's just exhausting.
Yeah.
So
I know. It's disheartening. It really is.
Yes.
And I tell you, I have a habit of going to, Petco or PetSmart and prowling the aisles with a clipboard and reading ingredients. And I make the employees very nervous. And, I'll go.
So I was going to ask, do you get stopped?
No one ever asks. They never
really.
They stand far away and stare. It's hilarious. Try it. It will crack you up. They will, they're waiting for you to ask them something. But if you just silently go through, but I have gone through every cat food in the aisle and left thinking there's not one of these that I would feed my cat. Not a one. Yes. If I'm in a mellow mood, I can find a few that aren't too bad, but boy, commercial pet food is just it's such a racket, and you can trust nobody. And even if you trust, that a truly boutique pet food company really is trying to do a better job, they're up against it. They can't do it and stay in business. They have to make a profit or they go under, right? So, but even the ones that are trying real hard, we can't build a better mouse. A mouse is a mouse, and it will never replace everything that's in it. For one thing, every animal that is slaughtered for food that ends up in pet food, with the exception of whole fish, I will say, the first thing they do is hang them upside down and bleed them out. So we're missing the blood. Well, there's a lot of taurine in blood. There's a lot of hormones. There's a lot of proteins. There's a whole lot of really important things in blood. So we cannot replicate that, And this whole trying to build a better mouse is never going to happen. So commercial pet food is never going to be ideal for our cats. It can be pretty good, but it's never going to be perfect. And anybody that tells you different, blowing smoke.
Agreed. I often get questions about cat nutrition, which I usually field off to catinfo.org or a page on my site that includes your books and our interviews, and catinfo.org, because I don't feel comfortable answering any of those questions. But I always say if I could get my cats to eat raw, that's what they'd be on. But when I did make homemade raw, because I tried every avenue to try to get them to eat raw, taurine was one of the things that we had to add to it, and it was crucial. And I think it's the recipe that's on catinfo.org that we followed at the time.
Yeah.
What is an ideal cat diet if you could make one?
I would take mice and grind them up and say, "Here you go, Perry." Because you can get frozen mice that are that are bred for snakes, right?
Yes.
And they come frozen in a bag, and but he's not going to eat that, and most cats won't, because they're, a cat's food preferences are formed in kittenhood, and whatever mom ate, that's kind of what they prefer. And as they get older, if they are not exposed to a variety of foods, they may come to expect that cat chow is the only thing on the planet that actually is food, and they won't touch anything else. So, cats are difficult. What I do for my guy, I feed raw, I feed some canned, I feed this, I feed that. Right now I've got this grass-fed organ meat supplement that's got little bits of all the organ meats ground up in it, and he's eating it. It's like, I just feel I got to supplement everything. And taurine, the daily requirement, cat's daily requirement for taurine is about 80 or 90 milligrams. So I would say a minimum 125 milligrams in each day's meal. But I would feed homemade, or something like Stella and Chewy's. He likes that. That's a really good option. This cat that I have, he's a rescue, and he was starving to death, so you would think he wouldn't be picky about food. Oh, no. So I actually have him his kidneys are shot from having been on the streets and nearly starved to death. So I actually have him on an appetite stimulant, so he will eat what I think is best for him, because otherwise he will only eat garbage. But I'm in a position where I can sort of enforce the rules, and I can tell him, you will eat this, and he will. But, the freeze-dried raws are good. I have a Nature's Variety raw things, and I feed freeze-dried chicken and a variety of things. So just a variety. I mean, the problem with not feeding a variety is that's when you get problems like this. You feed them the same thing all the time without variation for years at a time. Well, if the food is excessive or deficient in some respect, that's going to be a problem. Like remember the menu foods, the melamine disaster. People were just only feeding one brand or one flavor or something. And even brands that I like, that I respect, like Wellness, they went through a period where the foods are thiamine deficient. I have a friend who runs a cat rescue. She lost all the kittens and half the adults because she only fed Wellness.
Oh.
And the problem affected all of the Wellness products. So if she had been feeding a variety, never would have had a problem. So, I don't trust anybody. So I don't rely on any one thing to take care of my cat. I'm gonna feed a whole bunch of things, and he's gonna, by God, eat them. She says, "Wait a minute."
What is the appetite stimulant that you give him?
Mirtazapine. I have it formulated by a pharmacy. It now comes in a generic, but it's a very low dose, and I don't think it's effective. It's not cost effective, and I don't think it's as good. But if you have a cat with a poor appetite like this cat, even if I gave him all the junk food he wanted, he's still too thin. He was really wrecked for being on the streets for so long. He's got little round ears because his ear tips fell off from frostbite, and he's a wreck. Poor little guy. But he's gonna be as healthy as I can force him to be.
Yeah. I like it.
Yeah. So we can only do the best we can. But if you feed a variety, feed a mixture of meats. If you want to feed kangaroo just for a change, or beaver, fine. I've done that. I make sure there's a fair amount of poultry and a fair amount of this and that. And the other thing, I'm not a big fan of fish for cats. And there's an extensive article on Little Big Cat about that, and it'll be in my ebook. But, why fish is dangerous for cats. I don't like it, but, for a treat once in a while, oh, heck yeah, why not?
Yeah.
But it's very, very difficult, and I am constantly frustrated, and I can't even imagine how people who aren't veterinarians must be completely confused, and I feel so bad about that, and that's why I write articles and books and stuff to try and help people understand what's going on. But it's a mess, Jenny. It is a freaking mess.
It is a mess. And even if you're a veterinarian, sometimes I've heard pretty poor advice from veterinarians that contradicts the conversations I've had with you. So
when I was in vet school, we had a half a semester on nutrition out of 4 years, half a semester. At the end of that, I could formulate a sheep ration. But the dog and cat lecture was 1 2-hour lecture taught by a guy from Hills who came in and said, A is for anorexia, AD's for anorexia, CD's for cystitis, DD's for dermatology, GD is for geriatrics, KD's for kidneys. Any questions?
Oof.
That was Colorado State University in the 90s. So, they've gotten better, and a lot of schools have gotten better, but nevertheless, most vet schools have their nutrition department is headed by someone who's I wouldn't say on the payroll, I shouldn't say that, but the chair in nutrition is funded by Purina or Hills in most of the vet schools. So you can't trust anybody. I'm sorry. I wish I had better news, but
I know.
Information is the best defense, man. Keep researching.
Yes. Well, I want to go through some of these reader questions. Some of them might be a little bit repetitive, but if you don't mind answering them so that it's clear, I would appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay. And I'll include a link. So this interview is going to be on YouTube and on Floppycats. The transcription will be on Floppycats, and then the recording will be on YouTube. So I'll include links to everything that I say. I'll include links to in the About section of the YouTube video, but also hyperlinked within the text on Floppycats. So this post on our Facebook page, a reader named Jen asked, is grain-free bad to feed your pets? I've been hearing and reading conflicting opinions on this lately. You've answered this already, but if you could just say it one more time, please.
Grain-free is not bad. It's no worse than grain-containing foods, maybe marginally better. The problem with grain-containing foods is things like, the shishi ingredients like brown rice. Brown rice and rice are full of arsenic. And brown rice, the hulls, the rice bran, actually interferes with, guess what? Taurine! And corn is feed-grade corn. It's all genetically modified. I'm not a fan of grains. Cats aren't particularly inclined to get allergic to grains or legumes or potatoes. If a cat's going to form an allergy, it's going to form an allergy, and it's going to find an excuse to do that, which is why I feed a variety, and I rotate around from time to time, because allergies develop to things that they're exposed to over and over for a period of time. So variety, you will stay out of trouble. And the reason that those are in there in the first place is because they want the carbohydrates to make the machinery work and to make the food cheaper to produce, because carbohydrates are cheap calories. So, any carb is as bad as any other carb, I guess I would say.
Yes. Okay. The variety thing reminds me of, maybe it was you, but some veterinarian told me about a cat. I think it was my vet though. This cat was fed only a fancy feast variety that was like fish and shrimp or something like that. But the cat became so particular about it that it only ate a certain lot number.
Yeah, and that was me actually.
It was you?
Yeah.
Okay. Because maybe I told my vet, and she said that she had a cat that was obsessed with fish and shrimp too. But they had to go everywhere to find the lot number. Yeah.
It was awful. It was a Friskies food, and she was desperate. She had 141 cans left, And the cat, when she ran out of food, the cat was going to die because it was going to get hepatic lipidosis. It wouldn't eat anything else. Well, she needed to start right then and start incorporating other foods. I mean, one molecule at a time if you have to. I mean, it is always possible to get a cat to change what it's eating, but it's not necessarily a fast process, and you have to be sneakier than a cat, which is a pretty good trick. I had a cat I had two cats, started feeding them raw. Chinook ate the raw, immediately loved it. She was fed raw for 3 years before I ever saw Spirit take a bite of it. 3 years. So
now you know why I haven't been successful in switching my cats to raw.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of Jackson's cats was just as bad. He never did eat canned food. He would eat a variety of dry, at least. You know, he could be fed a variety. But stubborn, man. They know from stubborn.
I know. When we talked about mice before, I ended up several years ago, because one of my readers does the whole Franken-Prey thing. So I'll just say this in case someone that's listening doesn't understand that. She buys whole pheasants that are frozen online, and they're sent to her, and then she gives them to her cat to devour. So she said that she started out with mice, and you start out with pinkies, and then, the different sizes on up. And so I went to a local pet store here that sold the feeder mice for reptiles, but frozen. Although my cats would probably enjoy the live process, I wouldn't have been able to handle it.
No, that's a step too far.
But I did find in researching that and calling people online, because I said, if this works, I'll continue to do this. And there was one lady, a guy said, that would buy mice and throw them in her food processor, and that's what she would feed her cats. And I was like, whew. I wouldn't be opposed to buying the processed mice, but for me to hit pulse on that food processor would be really tough.
Yeah. Well,
even if they're dead.
The problem with a pheasant, if it's raised for food, for one thing, they're usually grain-fed, so their omega-3, omega-6 ratio is off. They're bred to produce more meat than a wild pheasant, so the calcium, the bone-to-meat ratio is off. And when they kill a pheasant, they hang it up by its feet and drain the blood, and then they sell them. So you're still not quite getting it. I mean, it's certainly better than a lot of options, but still not perfect. That's the issue. Now, I hope I don't cause a run on pinkies across the country, but I certainly would.
Well, how do they kill them? Because do they give them gas or something? Because that's what I was wondering about that.
I'm not sure. It probably is gas, but I don't know. Yeah, I have wondered, but I have never had the nerve to actually look into it. There's, I can take a lot of things, but not everything.
I know.
But I would certainly have a dedicated food processor just for that.
Yes. Well, so then I wonder, if you're feeding your cats even pinkies and they're getting gas, then is that in the lungs of the mice that they're eating, and is that toxic? I mean, just when does it end?
Well, if it's gas, it's probably not.
Okay.
I think the gas would just blow off because it's a gas. Okay. Well, I don't think it would stay in the tissues.
Okay.
I mean, when a lion catches a zebra, they strangle it. So you're going to have the same buildup of carbon dioxide and all that kind of stuff. I think it's probably similar. The other thing they may do, and I don't know this for sure, but I know they do it with some, in some cases, is they freeze them. They just freeze them and they just die. And from all that I know, freezing to death probably one of the more pleasant ways to go. So maybe that's all right. I don't know. But,
right.
I think our cats can do fine with a Franken prey model. We just do the best we can. It's going to be good enough. Is it perfect? No. But it's probably good enough.
Right.
So your Stella and Chewies, your Primal, your frozen raws are going to be the next best thing. Although I would like to point out that cooking does not significantly change the nutrition. It does denature the enzymes, but you don't lose that much in terms of nutrients. So if you're squeamy about raw, you can lightly cook meat and things like that, and it'll be okay.
Okay.
You can always add enzymes and probiotics.
Okay. All right, next question. Richard asked, do some grains such as brown rice add to the cat's digestive system?
Well, I'm not sure what that means, but they don't. Carbohydrates don't do anything for the cat, period.
Okay.
They don't need carbohydrates. They don't even need fiber, technically. There's no fiber in a mouse other than maybe a, zillionth of a teaspoon of grass in the digestive system of the mouse when he eats it. There's a lot of downsides to carbohydrates for cats. Small amount isn't going to hurt anybody, but they don't have a need for it, and they don't add to the nutritional value.
Okay. Cynthia said, I'm curious what she thinks of ingredients that are neither meat nor grains, such as potatoes, blueberries, or other fruits and vegetables. I'm generally aware that some are binders and others are added for nutrition, but would like to know if any of them should be avoided. Thank you.
Well, if you're talking about things like carrots and spinach and blueberries and cranberries, those are in the food at a level so low that they make no difference to the cat. Those are in there to appeal to your eyeballs, and they're window dressing, as I've heard it put. I call them glamour ingredients. They're just there for marketing purposes. There's not any nutritional reason for them to be there. And because they're in amounts so small that they're not going to make any difference, there's nothing that I would particularly avoid. If you have a cat that's had calcium oxalate crystals, maybe avoid the spinach and kale kind of things. But again, the amounts are so tiny as to be insignificant in the long run.
Okay.
If you're making the food, then there's a lot of things to watch out for. But, in a commercial food, no big deal.
Okay. Do you have a resource of where to go to if you're making a food? Is that covered in your book?
It is, and there's a recipe on my website as well.
Okay.
And I actually had it reviewed by a nutritionist, and I don't think he ran it through his program, but it seemed okay.
Okay.
But it hasn't been through there's a $5,000 computer program that formulates pet food. I worked with a formulator, Greg Aldrich. He's awesome, and he writes for Pet Food Industry, and he's a brilliant guy. And I was in charge of pie in the sky. I would say, can we please have this, that, and the other thing in the food? And he would, we came up with a formula. I said, can we up the omega-3s just a little bit? And he changed one thing on the computer, and it cascaded changes through 11 pages of spreadsheet. Nutrition is incredibly complicated, and I don't pretend to be good with it. And, there was an article in the AVMA journal, and my recipe was critiqued for not being complete and balanced, so I tweaked what I thought was wrong with it. So it's as good as I can make it, but I don't have a $5,000 computer program.
Gotcha.
So variety, just use different things, different meats, different veggies, different everything. You keep, when we grew up, Jenny, right, our mom would make breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we didn't eat the same thing every day, but over time, we all grew up big and strong. So each meal does not have to be complete and balanced, as long as your balance over time is adequate. And I think if you're feeding a variety and you're getting your basic supplements now, meat is not a cat diet. And I don't care what Lillian Jackson Braun feeds the Siamese cats in the cat who books. She's wrong. Those cats would all be calcium deficient, vitamin B deficient, a lot of other problems. Meat is not a complete diet. You've got to balance calcium. You've got to balance taurine. You've got to balance the B vitamins. You've got to balance. There's 35 nutrients required in the AFCO profile, and if you look at the USDA tables, there's over 100 nutrients in a food, just any particular food. So you have to balance. You have to supplement. You can't just feed, except maybe pinkies. You may be able to feed pinkies as a complete and balanced diet. But otherwise, just use common sense.
Yes. Okay. Tammy said, I'll be interested to hear what she says. I am in some of the DCM Facebook groups, which you already mentioned, and there have been some kitty cases. I switched to grain inclusive.
Yeah. Probably doesn't matter.
It's not really.
I would, if I was going to change from a grain-free food, I would change from kangaroo to turkey, or some other higher taurine meat, just to make sure. And I would make sure there's not more than 3 or 4 plant ingredients in the top 10 ingredients. When you start with many, many, many plant substitutions, that's when you're going to get into trouble. Grain or no grain, if it's corn, that's a problem because of the genetically modified portion of the program. But, cats don't need carbs, so which carb you use really not so relevant.
Okay. Well, that leads us to our next question. Judy said, could you please ask if peas or pea protein is any better than any other grain? Many pet food manufacturers use peas instead of grains, and I've read it can be bad. Can you also talk, though, about the difference between a green pea and chickpea? Because a lot of people get confused about that.
Chickpeas are also called garbanzo beans.
Yes.
So they're totally different. It's like between peas and kidney beans. It's just a different kind of legume, but it's still a legume. And the reason that manufacturers started using the legumes is because they're a little higher in protein. And so that reduced the cost of the food a little bit because they didn't have to put quite so much meat protein in.
Okay.
So, but I just don't believe that the presence of legumes or potatoes is the problem. The presence of carbs is the problem, and the presence of low taurine meat and too many plant factors and pieces and parts, that's the problem.
Okay. You've mentioned the kangaroo thing, and I almost wonder if I answered the guy's question incorrectly, so this is why I want to ask it. Can you please ask her if kangaroo meat is good as a main food? That's the only thing my cat eats, plus all day Royal Canin biscuits, which that person is either Australian or British. So they mean dry food.
Yeah, I don't recommend dry food. Tons and tons of problems from dry food. It's dehydrating. It's always high carb. See if your cat will eat the kangaroo if you add some taurine to it. You can get, Gero taurine. You can buy it online. You can get 500 milligram capsules or 1,000 milligram capsules. just make sure you get at least 125 milligrams of taurine into the food. Taurine does not have much of a taste. It's maybe a tiny bit salty. Believe me, I have tried it. It's fine. Just sprinkle that in the food just to abort any problems that may happen, because it was the most commonly implicated food was the kangaroo. So kangaroo, and I actually asked Quentin Rogers years ago. He's one of the guys at UC Davis that actually discovered the taurine deficiency problem in the 80s. He's a good buddy. He lives close by now, and he retired to Colorado. Good for him. And
yes.
But I asked him about kangaroo, and he didn't know. They hadn't tested kangaroo at the time. But now we know it is one of the low taurine meats, like lamb.
Okay.
And beef and elk and moose and venison. The ruminants, rabbit is also low, borderline low in taurine. I mean, all meat has some taurine, but kangaroo, rabbit, and the ruminants seem to be the lowest.
Okay.
So
can you
taurine, and and start with start with the end of a toothpick. Add that much. Okay, your cat's not going to notice that, and then you can work up to your 125 milligrams a day. But I would definitely add taurine to that food.
Okay. Can you overdo the taurine? Can you give them too much?
It's very
okay.
No, it's very safe. The studies that have been done have used huge amounts of taurine, no problem. I mean, the only thing is you might turn off the cat's taste if you put in boatloads, but it's so mild and it's very, very safe. Okay.
But if you were, I don't know, lazy, or you had someone else that was feeding your cats and didn't know the drill, and they just popped open a 500 milligram pill into your cat's food, that's not going to cause a huge problem.
No, if you're on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks, it's not going to cause a problem. And I don't think even after that it would cause a problem. It will hurt your pocketbook is all.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. That's about it. The other questions or the other statements are more about, there was a gal that lost her dog to DCM, congestive heart failure, and she's getting a cat, and she's worried about what to feed, but you've covered that. One of my questions after listening to everything that you've talked about is, if I'm looking at a can of food and it says, I'm looking at Feline Natural, which is made, I don't know if it's made in New Zealand, but it's a company from New Zealand. The guaranteed analysis has a minimum taurine of 0.3%.
Mm-hmm.
Is that bad?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. But the problem is that turns out not to be enough for some cats.
Okay. So how can a consumer...
Because all cat foods have to be supplemented with taurine. And every manufacturer knows this. Apparently, excuse me, my sense of it is that some cats have a metabolic defect that makes them require even more taurine. Or perhaps their microbiome is just especially greedy and is chewing up more of the taurine that comes in the food. When in doubt, add a little bit of taurine, But that's 0.3 is above the minimum recommendation, so I'd say that's fine. But, the caveat being every cat's an individual, and you can't tell nothing from nobody, for sure, for every single cat.
Yes. Okay. So no matter what, you've said commercial diets are never going to cut it, but what is that minimum amount? They're not ever going to be perfect. Right. So if 0.3% is above the minimum amount, what is the minimum amount that they're supposed to have, that a commercial pet food is supposed to have?
I forget. I think it's 2% in canned food and 0.5% in dry food, something like that. But, in order for the percent to make any sense on the label, you have to do a whole lot of calculations. And I would just think it's safe to assume that a commercial cat food that contains taurine has at least the minimum amount, because otherwise, they wouldn't be selling it in the U.S. So,
okay.
and the FEDIAF, the European pet food guys, the equivalent of AFCO in Europe, their taurine requirement is actually higher. So, there's always been cats with a genetic problem that, Maine Coon cats get dilated cardiomyopathy more than other cats. Is it related to taurine? We don't know. Probably not. The thing is, a lot of dogs and cats get dilated cardiomyopathy, but most of them are not related to diet at all. It's genetics. So, even if your cat gets DCM, there's probably 60-70% chance that it's genetic and nothing to do with the food. And that's true for 70% of dogs that get DCM. It has nothing to do with the food. So, DCM is bad if you get it. It's not fun. It's very uncomfortable. You'll be very sick, but you end up in the ER, and the cardiac unit for a few days, and because that's what happened to me. And by the way, I was on the Atkins diet at the time. I was eating a ton of meat, so it had nothing to do with taurine. In my case, it was a physical problem with the heart, nothing to do with taurine. So, for the vast majority of cats, my advice would be don't sweat it. You're probably going to be fine. Just get the best quality food you can. If you look at it and it's got tons of ingredients that are not meat, I might look twice at that. But, for the most part, you're going to be fine.
Okay.
So, the bottom line is don't stress it. Just, pay a little bit of attention and feed a variety, and you'll be fine.
Okay. I'm wanting to ask this question, although it's not really grain-free related. The difference between DCM and HCM, because HCM is always genetic or not?
They don't know. They don't know what causes it. There has to be a genetic component because it does run in a genetic fashion. But no, they don't know what causes it. They don't know how to fix it. It's just a thing. Okay. And it is not diet related, as far as we know.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I was just begging in my mind to ask that.
Right.
Do you have anything else?
Then there's something called restrictive cardiomyopathy that isn't DCM and it isn't HCM. It's a whole different thing. Heart disease is bad in cats. So it's just bad, but they mostly don't know why. So, and when they don't know why, there's probably a genetic component, but can they pinpoint it? No.
Okay. Oh, man.
I know.
Well, as far as the grain...
It's hard.
I'm like, well, this is refreshing and uplifting. As far as the grain-free stuff is concerned, is there anything that you wanted to touch on that we haven't spoken about?
I don't think so. I think we've covered pretty much everything.
Okay. I think so, too. Well, thank you very much for your time. There's one girl that commented 20 minutes ago, so I'll read this one really fast.
Oh, okay.
Binks is eating instant raw boost grain-free. The issue that we're having is that he'd rather eat his dry food than his wet food. Yes, welcome to my world. We have tried several varieties of wet canned food, and he barely eats any of them. The only one he kind of nibbles on is Cats in the Kitchen grain-free, natural canned wet food. He won't even eat plain shredded chicken. He loves the salmon flavor. Whole life cat treats. How do I incorporate more wet food in his diet? We've tried so many without success. Well, you don't need to address that if you don't want, but.
Right. Take away the dry food. If I have a kid and he comes home from school at 3 o'clock every day and eats a bag of pretzels and an apple and a few cookies, and then you try and give him something interesting for dinner and he's like, I'm not eating that. They have to be hungry.
Yes.
Feed in timed meals to start with. Okay, just pick up the food. You feed, you put the food down, you pick it up in an hour, period. No food until the next meal period, whatever that is. Cats need to be fed, ideally 4 or 5 times a day. Not everybody can do that, so 3 times a day I'd say a minimum. So like first thing in the morning, right after work or school, and then before bed. And you leave the food out for 30 or 60 minutes, and you pick it up. So at the next meal, they're hungry. And you put the wet food down first. And then if he doesn't eat it, you put the dry food down for a little while. You got to make the cat hungry. Because if he's eating cookies all day, which is what dry food is, I call it the Frito Twinkie diet. If he's gorging on Fritos and Twinkies all day, no, he's not going to eat broccoli, right?
Right.
So, it's just tough love. Believe me, I've been through it. Like I said, my cat had raw food available for 3 years before she ate it. And then, of course, she loved it. So,
yes.
But, man.
I'd be jumping from the rooftops if that happened for me. But, and also you can get creative with it, right? So I've heard about readers mixing in maybe a tablespoon of dry or half a tablespoon of dry with the wet so that they smell the dry, because isn't it that if a cat's appetite starts with their nose?
Absolutely. But I don't encourage mixing wet and dry just because dry food is known to be covered in bacteria, and if the bacteria get wet, they will start to grow. So then you really have to abide by the 30-minute timeline. You can't leave it down for more than 30 minutes or the bacteria will grow, and then it'll puke, and then you won't eat anything, and then you have a real problem. So, but in my book and on my website, both, there's articles about switching foods and every trick I have ever heard of. Lisa Pearson's site also has a chapter on switching, and she's got a lot of good tips. Some of mine I stole from her because we're friends, all fair. But
yes,
you just got to be sneakier than the cat, and you got to. One thing with Perry, even though he's on the mirtazapine, he's still, a little fussy. So I take the Nature's Instinct Boost little pellets of raw, and I crush them up, and I just sprinkle it on top of the food, and then he eats it. He'll eat for a few minutes, and then he walks away. Then I put the stuff on it, and then he'll eat more. So, it's, but they have to be hungry.
Yes.
They have to be hungry. That's the key to the cat's heart is through its stomach.
Right. And I don't remember who I first heard this thing from, and it's pretty common sense, but it might have been Jackson Galaxy that I was watching. That cats have a pattern of play/hunt, eat, groom, sleep. So you've got to create the play or the hunt for them, like play with a wand toy or whatever to get their appetite and their sense up. Yeah. And then that will help your endeavor
That's a great way to do it. And for those cats who have the 3 a.m. crazies, do that right before bed, and then they're tired and full, and they'll sleep all night. So,
that's exactly what I tell people that write me about their kittens. They won't let me sleep at night. Well, what's your pattern? Because I bet if you change it, then they'll be sleeping when you're sleeping.
Yeah.
And it works like a charm, so that's awesome.
Of ways. There's lots of ways to manipulate it. You just have to remember that cats hate change, so you got to be slow and sneaky with pretty much everything. And but if you go to a meal schedule, they're going to figure that out pretty fast.
Yes.
They're and then people get paranoid. Oh well, I suppose I have to work late, and I'm not home for 10 or 12 hours. He's going to starve. No, he's not. He's not going to starve to death. Lions will go for a week or two without eating. The cat's digestive system is set up for an eat fast, eat cycle. That's what they're designed for. So in the wild, they'll catch a mouse, eat it, catch another mouse, eat it, and then take a nap. Then maybe they'll catch 3 birds in a row or 3, but they're not designed to be on a perfect schedule or have the same thing all the time. I've never seen a cat come in and say, well, I will only eat purple finches. Chickadees, forget about it. And only field mice, not harvest mice, and not voles. Only.
Right.
They're not. That would be evolutionarily stupid. So, if you work with the cat's nature and try to think, if I was a cat in the wild, go watch a nature's something about mountain lions, and they'll catch a deer and they'll eat it for 2 weeks.
Yes.
Before they'll go catch something else. So
yes,
they're less fussy than you think, but they are as fussy as you have let them be.
Yes.
And
that actually is a great idea, to go watch a nature program about a big cat. That is what helped me understand how pulling meat off of a bone would help clean their teeth.
Yeah, because they just grind away at it.
Yes.
There was a veterinary dentist who did a lot of big cats in zoos, and he called it the hassle factor. And he said cats need more hassle factor, which is the ligaments and the tendons and the bones and the things that they have to chew and work out and exercise their jaw muscles. And that also consequently helps clean their teeth, because those things get down in between the teeth. The problem with all the tartar control and the stuff you put in water, none of it gets under the gum line, and under the gum line is where the problems are. You can have bright, shiny white teeth and horrendously infected under the gum periodontal ligaments and stuff like that. So, chewing is good. There's all in my book, really. I put everything I know about it. And it's, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I keep revising it because, I learned a new thing like 3 days ago that I had to put in the book. So, there's it's a constantly evolving thing, and it's worth doing the research and figuring it out. And as much as I can fit on my website, I've put there. And there is an article about the taurine. I need to update it a little bit, but there's a lot of information out there. Not everybody is reputable, and one thing I find is that the board-certified nutritionists are the most clueless, because they're the ones that say ingredients don't matter, only nutrients matter. Well, if I created complete and balanced ice cream and said I'm just going to eat that for the rest of my life, what do you think my health would look like? Mentally, I'd be thrilled. But I would be terribly malnourished and weigh 600 pounds.
Yes.
It's because you can't play with nutrients like that. I mean, you have to assure the nutrients, but the form the nutrients come in, whether it's good quality meat or crap quality intestines, it makes a difference. By the way, there is no taurine in byproducts. Keep that in mind.
Oh.
Yeah, it's in meat, muscle meat, heart, That's where the taurine is.
Okay.
But when they bleed the animal out, a lot of taurine is lost. So that's probably why they have to stick more in.
Mm. Do you have a particular source where you like to buy your taurine?
I get Jarrow, JARROW.
Okay.
I get my vitamins from Vitacost.com. It's way cheaper than anybody else I've found.
Yes, that's where I like to go shopping too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, in a pinch, you can go to Whole Foods and get it, but, next time plan ahead and get your restock from somewhere cheaper because they're going to charge an arm and a leg. But an arm and a leg is certainly worth preventing heart disease in your cat. So there you go.
Yes, it is. Okay, well, I'm going to go buy some taurine for my cats after this conversation. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk about grain-free and taurine with us. I appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to do it.
All right, and hopefully we can get another interview out of you soon. I need to be a little more consistent in reaching out, so I will do my best with that.
Well, I don't go anywhere anymore, so no problem.
Okay. Well, I will do that.
Okay.
Thank you again, Dr. Jean. I appreciate it.
Yeah, take care, Jenny.